I'm coming from Michigan, where it's we're going to be like rained on 36 hours now, I think.
Oh. Same with California.
A lot.
No break.
Newburyport, Massachusetts.
We're having unseasonably warm weather in Newburyport, Massachusetts. This is the first cool day. It doesn't seem cool enough for the leaves to turn, and they've waited a long time to turn.
Yeah, our foliage is way behind here in Michigan.
John.
Yeah, so sorry.
Yeah.
Where in Michigan are you?
Ann
In the
Arbor.
north? Oh, no way. I grew up in Ann Arbor.
Oh, really? I love
Yeah.
Ann Arbor. I studied here in the mid-10s, and then I just moved back. We moved back as a family about 3 years ago. So really glad to be here.
Yeah, I graduated
Where are
from
you now,
Pioneer.
Jen?
I'm in Fresno, California. I transplanted myself after a life in Michigan into California just 2 years ago. So
Very cool.
thanks.
In Michigan and California have some similarities, I think.
I worked in Berkeley for my first year here, and it was and I could understand why they often said that Ann Arbor is like the Berkeley of the Midwest.
Yeah.
Have you heard that expression?
Yes.
Very.
I've also heard it called the Athens on the Huron, which sounds a little bit grander, but
Oh, okay. Great town.
yeah, it is a great
I
town.
have a story I wrote about the ferry doors there. You've seen the ferry doors, right?
I've seen town, and then we also have a fairy garden that my sons love to play with. So we have our own little fairy door outside. But yeah,
Okay.
so cool.
Yeah, I discovered them when I was working downtown Ann Arbor, so I wrote a little story about the ferries.
Yeah, I think it's a town friendly to fairies for sure. Yeah, there's one fairy garden that takes up like 30 feet here, which kind of, questions the boundaries of fairy gardens normally. Seem to be quite small. Well, we have such a lovely group here. Alex, do you think should we?
Yes, that sounds good. Time to, you can get going.
Okay, great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and official welcome to today's Able Muse reading. I am Katie Hartsock. I'll be your host this afternoon, and I'm so pleased to be introducing the work of 3 books Able Muse is putting out this year. The work of Beyond Repair by J.C. Todd, Trap Street by Will Cordeiro, and David Berman's Progressions of the Mind. We will be hearing from JC and Will today in person, and on behalf of David Berman, whose publication was posthumous, Paulette Demers Turco will be introducing him along with Rhina Espaillat and Bruce Bennett, and they will be discussing his work and reading his poems. So what a delightful afternoon we have ahead of us. Before we move on to sharing the work of our poets, I want to give a grand thank you first to Karina Fernandez for all her wonderful help putting this together, and then also to Alexander Peppel, and of course my favorite epithet for him, the able man himself. And I want to introduce him before I have him pop on to say a quick hello to everyone. Alexander Peppel founded and edits Able Muse and Able Muse Press, and also founded and directs the Erratosphere online workshop. His poetry and prose have been or will be published in Barrow Street, River Styx, American Arts Quarterly, Light, Think Journal, Euphony, Per Contra, Measure, and elsewhere. He edited the Able Muse anthology, Able Muse Press 2010. Alex, say hello.
Well, thank you, Katie. and I have to thank Katie for jumping in to host on a very short notice, because Emily had some family tragedy issues and she couldn't complete the task of hosting. So thank you, Katie, for jumping in. And thank you everyone for showing up this afternoon. And I'm hoping it's going to be a lovely reading. This is one of the few lunch reading we're doing, and we have three capable poets. Some of you maybe haven't seen the books yet, but here they are. This is Trap Street from Will Cordeiro, which won the Able Muse Book Award a couple of years ago. And this is J.C. Todd's Beyond Repair, which is a very moving book also. And finally, this is David's posthumous book, which his friends will be reading on his behalf this afternoon. So I hope it's going to be a very fun and enlightening affair this afternoon. And with that, take it away, Katie.
Thank you. So we are going to read in reverse alphabetical order according to the last names of the poets whose books we'll be hearing from. And I will also say that, please, if you have questions, we'll be having a Q&A following the readings, all three readings. And so you are very, very welcome to then unmute at that time, or alternatively, you can put your questions in the chat and I can deliver your question for you, whatever you like. I would remind everybody to please remain muted. If you're not muted now, please mute yourself during the reading so that we hear only our poets. And then during our Q&A, though, you're very, very welcome to unmute and ask your question for our conversation afterwards. So with that, I am very happy to begin with our first poet, J.C. Todd. J.C. Todd is the author of 4 previous collections of poetry, most recently, The Damages of Mourning, a 2019 Eric Hoffer Award finalist, winner of the Rita Dove Prize in Poetry, and twice a finalist for Poetry Society of America Awards. She has received fellowships from the for Arts and Heritage, Pennsylvania Council on the Arts, and an artist residency programs, including the Bennett Center. Her poems have appeared widely in journals such as American Poetry Review, Beloit Poetry Journal, Mazocammon, the Paris Review, and the Virginia Quarterly Review. She lives in Philadelphia. JC, welcome.
Thank you, Katie, for that kind introduction. And I want to say thanks to the exceptional Alex Peppel and the people at Able Muse Press for publishing Beyond Repair without the little tags. And to David Mason, who was the judge for the 2019 Poetry Book Contest, for which this was selected as a runner-up. Beyond Repair is a chorale of mostly women's voices that bear witness to war and its aftermath. It looks at the lives of civilians and combatants in the Middle East and on the home front when soldiers return to civilian life. It's war, Fadwa says. A cousin moved to Baghdad from Tehran, gone. Her children, gone, or all of them missing, which may not mean gone, but just beyond reach, which may mean alive or not. It's war, Fadwa says, and there's no fog in her sorrow and clarity. 10 years, she says. No word. Wishing no one dead, even if they are. So the next poem, I'm going to sort of introduce poems by their situation, since the voices move around quite a bit. So the next poem responds to a video that was shot in Tahrir Square in Cairo on December 11th, 2011. And it went viral, and you may remember this incident. The girl in the square. Midday, not clouding over, but that tint of what's to come in the sky's deepening, like a water table rising when a pond receives weeks of pent-up rain in a single day. Just so, in a few hours, Tahrir Square will overflow with dark, and the boots that are sure to come down on the blue cups will be gone, and the breasts the blue cups covered will be darkened and swollen with bruise. And the girl will wash up, wash out, amnesiac among flotsam, snagged in the stream of a video that holds her up to memory, although the torrent has swept her away. And now we'll move to northern Syria. Night Ride, Al-Raqqa. At every checkpoint, long waits, corpses. In the back seat, her water breaks. Crown not stopping, newborn pushing into all of this. In whom the dying does not end. Just as her eggs began to cluster along the genital ridge, and the neural groove began to close, its cells churning toward brain. Just as a vacuole opened to become a mouth, and nubs of her limbs budded, Hafez, father of Bashar, ordered the military force of the regime to crush the revolt of the Muslim Brotherhood. This happened in Hama while I gestated, TV off, newspapers unread in Harrisburg, my thinking sludgy, speech cut back, consumed by what I fed. In February, the month I mostly slept through, a cat curled at each hip, at a riot of cells firing between them. From the second day until the 22nd, the troops of Hafez attacked the people that Hafez ruled. 20,000 dead, some say more, in 20 days. While her thousand cells swelled and halved, dividing into human, the only daily news I was aware of. Loved, she grew, singular, anarchic, safe in the province of my body, and Hama was raised. Hama, the mouth opens to begin, ha, then closes, ma, dampered. Hama, two exhalations drained of oxygen. Hama, they say to say more dishonors the dead, dishonors the living in whom the dying does not end. Hama, where no one dares to say the names of the dead except in secret. Hama, thousands distilled into smudge, smear, stain on crumbling walls whose shadows the living merged into, hoping to be unseen. What happened in Hama? Not asked as a question, stated to point to what can't be said. The city, rubble and crater, the dust of flesh, of sand and stone, a red, reproaching speech. In 1982, October 6th, my speech returned. My breasts reclaimed a buzz with milk. I woke, delivered by her birth, into what I'd missed, the world where she would live, its playing fields and killing floors. Tiananmen, Somalia, Cairo, Standing Rock, Gaza, Ferguson, Aleppo, where some will say nothing is left, not even names. A bed in Al-Rajan. Bed shams, scattered linens tugged from the taut restraint of tucked in corners. The clock ticks, the heart ticks, the bird keeps drilling the tree across the courtyard that we lost in the explosion. Drill, tick, whoosh of blood, the thick perfume of hyacinths heating up, all indivisible from this mangle. But there is no this, just fractions of flesh, a nose and no body, an ear and no body, a tongue and no body. Without a speaker, language, what is it? Not the stories that rise on words, not the image as an illustration, bed, shams, scattered, linens, drilling, bird, hyacinths, fragments. Have they made the bed as Allah makes it? While we are thinking war hasn't made the bed. So now we'll move to the invaders, the combat troops. So in this next poem, it's part of a hybrid sonic crown flash fiction sequence. It enters the thoughts of an Air Force physician. She is managing a patient on a MedCat flight, that's medical catastrophe, from an Air Force base north of Baghdad to an Air Force base in Germany, where the US treats its severely wounded. This one's the airman who's got to come through the flight alive, cocooned in twilight sleep, a patient pumped with meds designed to keep the range of organ function within a value defined as viable for transport. True, she's been trained to follow orders that overleap good medicine, good sense, but not to sweep aside her oath to heal. On ground, she knew that prepping him was packaging a lie, one less war zone body count, a fake out. She'll land him live. Although the indices have turned against survival, she'll verify his status. Joke, this mercy flight's a takeout delivery. He's cold to the elbows and knees. And then those with post-traumatic stress who bring the war home to their families. Particles. Now there is a clot in the heat-dried air. Her voice retreats inward. She swallows commands there was no time to give, holds them down. Like tracers, they light what she saw. The air was a coarse ground of red meat. She tries to deny it, but the memory of their shoulders clings like sand on her tongue, and certain thoughts spin like stuck wheels. Suppose the air returns to being the air, and that long day of heat cools down. Now, knowing what she knows, how can I not see blood in the cloud stream of sunset? My daughter, no pills can erase, no remorse clear the air of particles you breathed in. They circulate in you. You entered the compound behind the fire team, and all but you are gone. So before I read the final poem, I want to offer my thanks again to Able Muse Press and to all of you who've gathered here in this virtual room of poetry. I'm looking forward to listening with you to the poems of Will Cordeiro and David Berman. And the last poem I'll read is Sonogram. Before she left, the tech shot me through with sound that the full and useful bladder bounced onto a screen, echoing internals, image by image. Then she named my organs one by one: uterus, ovaries, liver, adrenals, kidney, spleen. Abdomen smeared with oil, exposed in the chill of a sanitized room. I wait for the verdict. Urethra's burning. I'm not allowed to pee the 2 quarts of water they had me down an hour ago. Rising like a backwash, an image of villagers I read about in 7th grade. Villagers marched sweating and thirsty, yoked to drums of water, rounded into a roughed clearing and force-fed the water they'd carried and called for until their bellies swelled and hardened into gourds. Bursting in me, insurgent memory walled off for 30 years. Where is the sonogram, CAT scan, MRI to locate rogue cells that refuse to forget? This is where the sorrow lodges, here, where it hurts. Thank you.
Oh, JC, thank you so much. That was stunning and so moving how you transport between the worlds of the body and the whole nation or time and different conflicts and politics. Just amazing how you connected the intimate to the universal in those poems and back again. Thank you so much. And I'm looking forward so much to the Q&A where we could talk more about your project and especially the female perspective you're bringing to war and women in war, both the civilians and fighters and medical assistants. Just beautiful. Thank you so much. In our experience of delight and poetry this afternoon, we continue now with our next poet, Will Cordeiro. And I'm pleased to introduce him. And Will, if you are you pop? Oh, there you are. Hi, Will. Nice to see your face. All right. Will Cordeiro has work published or forthcoming in Agony, Bennington Review, Copper Nickel, Threepenny Review, Thrush Poetry Journal, and elsewhere. Will co-edits the small press Egg Tooth Editions. Will's debut poetry collection, Trap Street, was selected by David Mason as the winner of the 2019 Able Muse Book Prize. Will is also co-author of Experimental Writing, a writer and anthology, forthcoming from Bloomsbury. Currently, Will teaches in the Honors College at Northern Arizona University. Welcome, Will.
Thank you, JC, for that lovely reading, and thank you, Alex and Katie and everyone at Able Muse for helping to make the book possible. And thank you all for coming out and joining us today and listening to some poetry. I'm going to read a few poems. This collection has quite a few poems that deal with place and travel. So I'll begin with one of those transients. A girl arrives to take my place this 1st of June. By noon, I'm out, the car jam-packed in part with my apartment all too soon. Few days at a friend's, blank space to fill before I leave again for some small shack to write and stand against the rack of shore. Make do with my small handful, read another's books, avoid the chocolate bar of soap in topmost drawers, wondering which box my underwear is in. Road spans on, more loops. Each highway blurs like skipping rope, and with each leap I take, lost years elapse, I'm ever off and other, daily stunned by the sunder that I've become, a newcomer who dallies over, under, into someone else's life. Past rumbling hills and valleys eclipsed of sun, I'll rally as a beachcomber and pick the flush tide trash that flashes from what I mistake for hermit shells, but closer proves to be discarded tackle tangled in the drift, scavenged by the squawking droves of gulls. For now, I'm siren spelled within a borrowed loft, buskers on the commons jangle, a time-worn song up to my open window. I'm going to read this one. I don't often read this one. I figured, why not though tonight? Cavities and conduits. The goings on are ongoing in the face of fluctuating waves and weather. Here, honey blobs of nonplussed jellies bobble, slowly slush down funneled furrows, bubbling as sand fleas breathe between sweeps and swells. A quahog peekaboos and sticks a foot out of its mouth, its bivalve shell. An urchin cock spare toggles. A hawk glides over slog and gullies. Horseflies maculate into a clot. Viscera they muckle down to snot and lingerie. Stalking, the spider crab won't raise an eye. Sideways and waist sides through twitter-pated skitter skating, flushed out from underlips along lattice work of sticky reeds and tide pool shallows. Each side's teem and drool with sticky organs, all mush and crushed, moon-strange ducts and honey-swilling mucus, blotted spit shine down the compact, botched jigsaw fitting innards. I am an anemone whose anus is the same as its fat lip. I gaze into my rigging's lacquer, its food and sugar. I'm tickled pink. My body, a tube worm, fermenting in bacteria. I womp catawampas down the spittle twisted moibus strip. One silver flinch of splintered minnows, rash inchlings, quicken an instant, grazing slender shadows through rich bushes. There's several more narrative poems in the book as well. This one I'm going to read is called Haunting. It's around that time of year. This one's a Halloween poem. Haunting. My father was adept at making masks. Each Halloween, he'd give himself the task to fashion from the cast-off cardboard boxes at his factory a costume to outfox the routine drag. But not for him, for me. He'd work it like an armor till it's seated, an armadillo, damselfly, or lobster. A mobster's lair or a secret lab, pink packaged peanuts filled our living room. What fantasy this year would I assume once he had wrinkled, pasted, patched, and painted, and labor those long nights alone with pain expressions of pure pleasure? Ah, my inkling was a furtive cockroach with hairy gangling arms I'd puppet up as light as rag, and close like one tight fist. But no, a daddy longlegs took shape from other shipping crates. At the parade, the whole contraption weighed down my shoulder, a visor's compound eyes fit snug upon my cranium, the size of hand-me-downs, too small and big at once. which crush me like 10 pounds for every ounce. What we inherit, we shall make our own, says Goethe. Stitched up heads and broken bones, and Frankenstein's fair parts abound. I passed a sea of nasty children posing as trolls, werewolves, witches, fairies, babies, ghosts. I search for father, but I fear he's lost since every frozen visage looks like his, blank mirrors of the self's paralysis, which I projected, toddling through the crowd, shoved back by ghouls, pushed forward by the clowns. Then goaded on, I find him. He says we won, most terrifying, pandemonium of seeing oneself, stripped of one's facades, a spider dangled from the hands of God. He rarely said a word, but showed his love in rougher ways, I guess the meanings of, such as when pressing me to peel my costume off, shell in which I'd never feel accustomed. Traditions grip us with estranging force. A man is a collection of his faces. This next one, it's a little bit longer. It's in sections, a couple of sections, few sections. It's also a poem of place. It's called Spiral Jetty. 1. Against a gray and formless sky, longing to be raptured, we drive for hours past capsized boulders strewn in empty fields, wheat gold fragmite unraveling without one buffalo, a patch of spike rush, of pickleweed, industrial gravel pits, the promontory mountains in the distance past a center point where the iron tracks of east met west, some faint mephitic rot from seagulls decomposing on the shore. And then a frail declivity. We step out of the car across the vertex of the lava rocks, each pockmarked where the lake's been shriveled back by drought, looming, cold, and far. 2. The jetty, just a heap of stones, salt-encrusted keepsake of basalt, the shallow lake still half a mile out, sucked back and lost, though its curve holds steady like another turn, yearning to be nature, a gallery of lockstep stopgaps and aftershocks forsaken and defiled. 3. A wind now lures the waters light, slight variations riven, the current torn, unsettled, as if illusion were scoured and given form upon the flats. 4. Delivered to the optic edge, where the wind has parceled out its paradox, half bed of salt like snow, a barren parallax, alien of anything that grows. We step into the disc embodied on the counterclockwise stone, and down into the rock-ribbed time, at times forgotten. 5. A mass of wind-blown foam jellies up into a horde, shivers, fribble, jury-rigged and spastic, some fraught thing which has no sympathy for us. This one is called Double Dutch. A beaded rope claps off the ground, another loops back in reverse. The black top tap each city block great work down which they have tripped. The checkered projects fade away. A tree nearby has dropped its leaves, fruit scraping on the cracked up road. A trap is set. The troop counts off. A girl has stepped inside an egg, which swoops and snaps below her leg, above her head. So many forces gyroscope as they rehearse to face them out. Each foot floats over shadows, spate and skip and scat with every twist, avoiding double time and faster tricks. The counter slap pivots out of with a practiced stagger, having learned the ropes. Slips under the still spinning braid to hand it off. Another girl, quick leaping in, looks on her toes, a swing that threatened broken yokes. The noise around her keeping up, the scheme of time she's kept by, still remembering to evade each turn. And I think I'll finish with this one. This one's called Decay. Whole days spent looking out across the lake. Cold mizzle glistened on slick beards of moss. Dizzy raindrops wriggle from a spider's thread. Blue mountains levitate in far-off tones of gray, and morning takes its slow time with the burn-off revenant of fog's decay. Each water bug is bent on its reflection. Squirrels corkscrew up the paper birch. My brain roots dawdle into rotting hummus. One bloodshot loon seems evidence of folly. My own, that is, a residue from last night's vendor. Blundering out the door, I step through brackets of lush maidenhair toward the dock. I strip and jackknife under, scud and shiver off my melancholy, then find a cadence heading for the point. I drizzle as I lurch out from the water, lie smitten in a play of patchwork sun, until the stupor that I'm in relents. Perhaps the mushrooms lift their skirts. Perhaps I could love whatever, earth moist and giving below my feet, since no distinctions matter when weather gunks up reason. These latter days, the rings of each trunk fatten, curlicues of vines go tangling off into themselves and re-emerge as if a memory of something golden twisted them that way. I sit with languor now a little longer and hear an earwig dig inside a burrow. Cloudbreak spills cider over hazel grass. First touch of autumn in the Adirondacks, I think of how my thinking will become ground cover flush with acorn caps. Shadows maraud the copper scraps at dusk. Birds rush away like orphan sparks of fire. Come, I tell the darkness, take your time, erase me. Thank you.
Thank you, Will, so much. Oh, that last line, the advice to the darkness, so gorgeous. Thank you so much for the way that meditation and landscape and praise moves through the music of your poetry so beautifully. I am looking forward to a chance in the chat to talk especially for your beautiful use of blank verse in those meditations, just gorgeous. Thank you so much. And now for our final portion of the reading, I am going to turn things over to Paulette, and she will be mini hosting the portion of the reading dedicated to David Berman's Progressions of the Mind. First, I would like to introduce Paulette. Paulette Demers Turco, a Powwow River poet, is editor of the Powwow River Poets Anthology 2, also 2021 from Able Muse Press, and co-organizer of Powwow Poetry Readings. Her poetry also appears or is forthcoming in The Lyric, The Poetry Porch, Quill and Parchment, Loch Raven Review, Mesocammon, and others. Her chapbook In Silence was published by Finishing Line Press in 2018. She is a retired optometrist and lives in Newburyport, MA, where she also enjoys photography and painting. Paulette, thank you.
Thank you so much for this kind introduction, Katie. And thank you to the readers who preceded me. Oh, such beautiful, haunting, and powerful poetry. Oh, it makes for a wonderful day. Thank you, Alex, Peppel, and your Able Muse team, Able Muse team for this honor. To mini host two esteemed poets, Bruce Bennett and Rhina P. Espaillat, who will read from David Berman's posthumous poetry collection, Progressions of the Mind. A special thank you here too for A.M. Mike Juster, and also an esteemed poet and longtime powwow, who with Rhina and Bruce read and organized thousands of pages of David Berman's poetry to help this book become a reality. I will share a few words about David Berman before introducing our readers. David Berman loved life and did nothing half-heartedly. He loved his dear wife, Margaret, his children, and his grandchildren. His poetry shows what he held dear, and you will hear that soon. and his depth of understanding of the human condition. While he studied law at Harvard, he felt privileged to be able to take Archibald MacLeish's poetry course, where he met Bruce Bennett, who would become his lifelong friend and first reader. David launched his legal career with a splash, clerking for Justice Jacob Spiegel of Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, then serving as Assistant Attorney General of Massachusetts under Edward Brooks, before building his practice with a concentration in business law. That's not like poetry. But all the while, his poetry appeared in literary journals, including The Formalist, Sparrow, Orbis, and others, in 3 chapbooks, and in the first Powwow River anthology. The second Powwow anthology is dedicated in loving memory to David Berman. It is now my great honor and pleasure to introduce the first of our readers, Bruce Bennett, author of 10 full-length collections of poetry and more than 30 poetry chapbooks. His most recent full collection, Just Another Day in Just Our Town, Poems New and Selected, 2000 to 2016, was published by Orchizes Press in 2017. He is Emeritus Professor of English at Wells College in Aurora, New York, following 40 years of teaching literature and creative writing and directing the Visiting Writers Series. Please welcome Bruce Bennett.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, okay,
Thank you.
sorry.
Yes.
Can you hear me now? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Paulette, and a special thanks to Alex for making this possible and for bringing out this long-awaited book that we so cherish. It's an honor to be reading and remembering David today. I'll be reading 6 short poems of his that will give a sense of what David characteristically thought and wrote about. And the first is called Dutiful. And David wrote a lot of sonnets. Many of these are sonnets. Make mother proud of you, and father too. Those good boy chestnuts that I swallowed whole upset my stomach. Still, I played the role expected of me, doubting that they knew how long I worked to make their dreams come true, how hard I drove myself to reach each goal, that they might claim the prize, how great the toll those doubts I tried to, but could not subdue, demanded. They died proud of me, I guess. One hopes and wonders even at the end. Now that I've no one to make proud, I must invent their ghosts to proffer each success, unsure that they are pleased and queasy, lest they put their smiles on only to pretend. David wrote a lot about time and clocks. I think it's fair to say he was obsessed by them, and he says it himself in this poem, The Clock Watcher. Even when listening to fugues of Bach, even while visiting my mother in her last few days, I had to have a clock or watch nearby. So it has always been. Since first I learned to read the hands, I felt compelled to read them, maybe most compelled when faced with nothing threatening to melt or burn, when time was only grace withheld. Call it a habit, call it an obsession. Is anyone so wise he understands what drives the want with such absurd aggression it cannot be held back? What makes their hands so vital I would almost trade my own before I let their movement go unknown? This is a poem called Reproof. David frequently reproofed himself. How often in my dreams I am expected to try a case entirely unprepared, or give a speech in Greek so long neglected I scarce recall the alphabet. Absurd what those ascending through the ivory gates demand of me asleep, and stranger still how terrified I am of what awaits if I should prove unable to fulfill the sheer impossible. Who are they? Who that judge whose hands are always forming fists? That steely-voiced professor dressed in blue? Authorities unable to resist a chance to bully? Why do they not know that I became one of them long ago? And lifelong love, of course, was Bach. And here's one about driving while listening to Bach. Deserving a cathedral, or at least a gilded hall affecting high Baroque, Bach's weighty organ works are finely pieced upon a spool that weighs an ounce at most, to be replayed in, say, a car. And so, as I ride on expressways and along the city's sprawl, blared from my stereo, the fugue in D is mingled with a song of windshield wipers, engine fans, and tires. Could he be at my side? What would he say? It's taste that counts. Do what the age requires. Or how could you have gall enough to play music meant to swell the contrite heart in this swift arrogance devoid of art? So we all sometimes want to avoid the news. Here's a poem about that, but not quite avoiding it. The Cave Dweller. I once could not imagine turning out the light, not having heard news at 11. But now that I am old, I do without it, positing that if I wake in heaven, someone may whisper it, and if on earth, the news will be there by the morning light. No need till then to rediscern the dearth of kindliness, the plethora of blight. This is a way of saying, I suppose, the world gets on without me very well. That it took years for me to learn this shows how one not overly naive can dwell in shocking ignorance of who he is and how much of the world is really his. And finally, the season is coming up. David knew how to enjoy himself with friends at wonderful places. I happen to know this was an inn in Western Massachusetts, but it could be anywhere. This is called Rural Christmas. Christmas Eve, this FM stereo delivers tasteful music and discreet commercials. This palatial inn has no space like a manger, just good things to eat, fine wine to drink, a comfortable bed. The animals asleep upon the hay will never wake unless, dispirited, they wander into human dreams to play. The year of rage recedes into the night, which holds no special star to guide the wise to Bethlehem, itself a tourist site and little else. God is beyond surmise, and man-made comforts must suffice to fill one's emptiness, one's indolence of will. Thank you.
Thank you, Bruce. It is now my great honor and pleasure to introduce Rhina P. Espaillat, co-founder of the Powah River Poets in Newburyport, Massachusetts, and longtime friend of David Berman. Dominican-born, Espaillat is a bilingual poet, short story writer, essayist, translator, who has founded successful workshops, published 17 books and counting. teaches creative writing to both adults and adolescents, and is a frequent speaker at schools and other cultural centers. Her two most recent collections were published in 2019. They are And After All, published by Able Muse Press, and The Field, published by David Robert Books. Please welcome Rhina P. Espaillat.
Thank you very much, Paulette, for that kind introduction, and thank you, I always call him Saint Alex, because he has done so much for poetry and for poets and has done it all so well. I remember David Berman as one of the kindest and most generous human beings that I've ever had the good fortune to encounter. He had a gift for hospitality and a gift for friendship like nothing I've ever seen. He was hospitable to everyone. He loved to serve the fine food that he himself made because he was also a skilled cook. And he loved to pour the wine. And he loved to stay at the end of a pleasant evening in his house. When he took the guests to the door, he would say, "Do come again soon." And I'm going to wonder for the rest of my life whether something like him will ever come again, as he used to say. As a member of the Powwow River Poets, he taught and improved the group simply by being there and by critiquing our work, always kindly, always tactfully, but always truthfully. He never lied, but he managed to say what he said without hurting anyone, and he improved every poem he commented on. And I'm sure that Bruce Bennett will back me up on that. It was a joy and a privilege to be part of the team that got together to produce this book, which I recommend wholeheartedly because it is a treasure, quite a literary treasure. I'm going to read 6 of his poems to show the breadth of his interests, the kind of thing that he covered and thought about. Here's one called Witches. Witches. They are not gone, they dwell within. They sour your milk, inflame your skin, estrange your wife, excite your cat, exhume your dead. They're good at that. The bell is broken, the candle burned. The book is missing, untaught, unlearned. Such doubtful arts. Besides, you doubt such remedies can force them out. And they predict, as in Macbeth, because you let them, life and death. It's about our horrendous expectations of the future, fears of the future, and what we do about them. And here is unrecited declarations. We hold these truths until they drop, or we do both do, and then we shop for truths a bit more portable, more up to date. Our hands too full already and not really strong, the stern demands of truths held long add to their weight, make them seem rough, still good, but not quite good enough. This was his tone. His tone was to give and give and give, and then take back a little bit at the end, so that you're left with a kind of emotional ambivalence that adds to the wisdom of what he said. And here's one called Sacrifice. Sacrifice. It means I give up something that is mine for God, for you, for others who may give up something too, for many more. Not something that they would have got along with just fine, but something they thought good enough to fight to keep. Strange looking back to say that though I gave, I never sacrificed. However generous my gift appeared, I gave only that which seemed to lack a rationale to have. Nothing with which I could not bear to part. Nothing that came quivering from the heart. And I find that poem hard to believe because he gave so much that I can't believe that much of it was sacrifice. But he didn't like to be thanked for what he gave. He didn't like to be to be thought greater than he thought of himself. He was a humble man by nature, and nothing with which I could not bear to part, nothing that came quivering from the heart. A good man. Weekend grandchildren. He had a house full of grandchildren every chance he got, and he adored them and they adored him with good reason. They are polite, but curious about things we would least suspect, that some clocks chime and others don't, why teapots have straight spouts and coffee pots are crooked. We make time for them, who seem to us to have abundant time, whilst they are patient with our gait, refrain from showing us that we're redundant, who neither teach nor parent, violate no sancta of the breath, and otherwise become the angels of our buried dreams. What are we doing right? Unfeigned surprise, becoming bolder, asks, and thereby means to warn us that a house of fleece and wood is necessarily ephemeral. And there's a sense of his own ephemerality, which I don't believe in for a minute. I think he's going to be with us forever. And here is De Senectute of aging. Sunday, Sunday, dear old friend, now that I'm old, you come too often to be privileged, too lacking in aplomb to be received with flourishes or made to feel at home. Sunday, Sunday, my old friend, when and where this rift? I don't remember quarreling. I don't know why we drift together into separateness like giver and like gift. Now think about those last two lines and how unusual they are, and the kind of contorted intellect that it takes to come up with a phrase like that. I don't know why we drift together into separateness like the giver and the gift. Not that one. A tour of the interior. This is the train I never took. This is my first unwritten book. This is the sweetheart I never kissed. These keys I lost, but never missed. This is the apple I never tasted. This is the scrapbook I never pasted. This is the poem I never wrote, whose lines professors never quote. This is the coin I never tossed. This is the river I never crossed. These are the stairs I never climbed. These are the rhymes I never rhymed. This is the living I worked to make. That is the train I meant to take. This is the sound of disappointment from a man who did so much, who achieved so greatly, and who nevertheless always seemed to feel that he ought to have achieved more. So I leave you with this person who was a dear gift to the world, a gift to poetry, and a gift to those of us who loved him. Thank you.
Thank you, Rhina. That's wonderful.
Oh, thank you so much, Rhina. Thank you so much, Bruce. Thank you to it. Now you know we've all had this exercise. David has, through their voices, has taken us in these journeys in and out of ideas and sounds and music, and it's just been beautiful. Thank you to our hosts, and thank you to our wonderful audience. And I give the mic back to Katie.
Yeah, thank you so much, everyone. And I would invite everybody to unmute briefly, and we can have a round of applause together for the beautiful, beautiful poems we've been treated to this afternoon.
Thank you. This was beautiful.
My thanks to the first two readers who were wonderful.
Wonderful. Yeah, I love room applause. It echoes across the country. I would love to move now to a Q&A portion. So as I said before, if you have questions, you can raise your hand and I'll keep an eye out, or you're also welcome to put your questions in the chat. and I can deliver them. We've had such a rich range of poets and words and images this afternoon, and if I'll keep an eye out, but I can start us off by asking a question. I was wondering about JC's work. JC, I would love to know more about how you came to focus on the particular landscape and topics of Beyond Repair, both from the perspective of the kind of particular female lens, the mother, the female soldier, the female medic, but also the way the book, as I've seen it, like uses military language, which is meant to be, you know, efficient and like one use, one single meaning, and like turns it into poetry. Like you have a whole section called Fubard, which, you know, for those of us who might not know, Fubard, effed up beyond all repair, which is part of your title too. And so I just also like, I love that way that you're using language, particularly like in the collection as well, and transforming military language into poetry.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'll start with the first part. It actually, I got shocked into these poems and thinking like this. I have one of my sons, one of my daughter-in-laws, and one of my grandchildren were in Iraq and Afghanistan. And of course, never said anything about what was going on. So I had to, you know, find out not really what was going on with them, but what was going on with military people. And I read military blogs for years. And then they led me one after the other to things. So it was a very personal connection. But I think when I discovered that in 1982, when I was pregnant with my daughter, while I was doing research, I saw that was where the government of Syria attacked its people. And of course, that's continuing today. So my daughter is 39, so that's 39 years. And so then for some reason, I felt that my body was part of the witness. As for the,
and I just want to add, like, I love what you just said, and the line you had, you know, delivered by her birth into the world I had been missing. I loved that so much. And the connection of the single body to the world.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, I have a relatively privileged life. Bombs are not exploding on my doorstep. Wheat is not blocked on the street that I live on. You know, the wheat deliveries, the things that happen in other places. So part of this was, part of the language was I was looking for a way to enter this honestly as a distant witness, but a witness who was close in heart. And the military language, little bits of it, Fubard particularly, a great word. You can only use it as an adjective. So anyone who uses it as a noun, everybody knows, not military, don't know what they're doing. So my grandson taught me about that. And so I wanted to use it a little bit, but to break it so that its efficiency and its compression and everything that's hidden by that compression would somehow be revealed, not specifically, but in general.
Thank you so much. What a phrase. Everything that would be hidden by its the compression and hidden by its compression. My goodness. Yeah, Rhina.
I'd like to say something to JC, that I think it's wonderful that you've proved that poets not only write about the world around them and about their own lives, they even write about those things that are not part of their own lives, but that in their thoughts and feelings are precisely part of their lives.
Yes.
In other words, what you're thinking of, what you're fearing, what you're wishing, it becomes part of your work. It's
Thank
wonderful
you,
poet, wonderful poems.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I'll keep an eye out for raised hands and in the chat, and please break in. But I'd hinted at this earlier that Will, I'm kind of totally in love with your blank verse. And like I think of a bunch of us in the chat, we all were struck by that line, "A man is a collection of his faces," which is something so many of us might carry into our trick-or-treat evenings as we're looking at the costumes. Such a great time of year to hear that, but also timeless, of course. I was wondering too, if you could just talk to us a little bit about like your sense of what blank verse offers and your particular relationship to it. Because so many of my favorite poems in your collection like are blank verse, especially Umbra Season. I love that one so much. And I think several of your reviewers quoted that line, "Earth's everything I am," which is just, the final, most of the final line of that poem. But yeah, if you could talk about your relationship to blank verses, I would love to hear you discuss that.
I think that I remember I was at a blank verse workshop when I was a teenager at Westchester, and I had no idea how to write blank verse over 20 years ago. And I remember so I was very much a failure, but the next year I was abroad in England and kind of had a lot of time on my hands, fortunately. I was still in college at that point, but I just like kind of sat down with like the Prelude and Paradise Lost and all the great blank verse sort of epics, and just read in Shelley and Wallace Stevens and just so many of the great blank verse poets that are out there. And after that year, I could hear it in my head, and just everything would, I could hear the enjambments. One thing I really like, for example, in Pope, for example, is where the caesures. Pope is very good about putting the caesures in different places throughout the lines so that none of them seem stagnant. So knowing how to do, then looking at the subtleties of different types of blank verse that are out there, very like modernist type poets who might not think of it as blank verse, but then you step back and like, oh, that actually is, it's in the background. So some of the poems I read, like Spiral Jetty, it might sound like blank verse when I read it, but it's all scattered on the page. It doesn't look like blank verse at all. And so then I started pushing against that and saying I can have the blank verse, but then the lines can do something else too. The lines don't have to be following the blank verse. So you have other ways that you can break it up and stretch and push and fracture and So I don't know. I think there's lots of it's something to have in one's toolkit, I think, and really kind of play with and see where you can bend and stretch that. I try to work in other meters and free verse and other things too, but yeah, I think I think I do hear things in that blank verse line. I've been trying to make my lines shorter sometimes, but I still think that I am impelled by sort of the blank verse tradition a lot.
Well, I'm Lee Behan. Hi, Will. I was delighted to hear your work. I'm translating Petrarch and the phase of his life and poetry and how his craft right now is to scale everything back and peel everything back and make it as plain and yet musical as possible. And that is a sore trial for me. Once I was in workshop and I said, I made up the word jewelless and put it on a workshop poem on the table. it was just like, it's like Scrabble. That's not a real word. It's like, I needed it. I made it up. And I just loved hearing your work because it was such a refreshing change from the things I am, you know, what I must do right now and discipline myself. So keep doing it.
Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Lee.
You're welcome. Thank you.
You're here. Yeah, so yeah, just so many delights in your work. And I loved hearing you talk about the caesura too, which is something you've done. And I think is what is a marker of the beauty of your blank verse. Like even that last line of Umbra season, I lays away, earth's everything I am. Just that breath and that pause after the first sentence and 2 feet. And then that humdinger of a last line. So, and I was thinking of it too when I was just teaching Frost's Birches. Anyway, well, oh, and I see a hand up from Francine Sturl. Yeah, please, Francine.
Need to unmute.
Sorry, that was a mistake. That was a
Hello.
mistake. My cat just walked over my keyboard.
No,
Sorry.
she's at the birthday
Well,
party.
if the cat turns out to
Her
have
friend,
a
one of her.
question, please let her come on. If not, I'd be very happy. Oh, and I see Rob Wright is raising his hand. Please, yes, Rob.
Thanks. This is directed to JC, and it's a more general observation. And that is, I realized when you were reading, first of all, the power of the work was just extraordinary. But the subject, I don't know any poets, I mean, me included, who are addressing this. And it's such a big part of our lives. I was strongly reminded of it when I had an HVAC guy here, and he was in my office and I was paying, sending out the check, writing the check for the job. Looked at my bookshelf back here and saw Dante, and he said, I love Dante.
Huh.
And I gave him he didn't have a dual translation, so I gave him the Mendelbaum. And he was twice back from 2 tours, and I realized what poetry must have meant to him, particularly Dante. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you for that story, because it's moments like that, I think, that that welcome people back who have removed themselves from society through war, through hurt, through damage of any sort. And I think part of my motivation, how can I say this, was to make it plain to women, particularly I know who had served, that their lives were not completely foreign to what they might have been had they not served. That someone who is like a civilian and a pacifist can identify with and sympathize with the inner quality of living in conflict.
I have to add also that when I spoke to him, it wasn't just the Inferno that he was fascinated with, but Purgatorio, coming back up. He was an amazing man.
Yeah.
Yes, Rhina, please.
Bruce Bennett had the rare privilege and the joy of being the first reader of David Berman. He has told us quite a bit about that. I wonder if he would tell this audience something about it as well.
Unmute.
Okay.
Bruce.
I thought I did. Now you can hear me now, right? Or
Yes.
not?
Yes,
Okay.
yes, I can hear you.
Okay, very, very briefly, as Paulette mentioned, I too had the privilege of being in the last course of English S that Archibald MacLeish taught at Harvard in the fall of 1961. And it was not only very exciting to be in that class, but among the many people I met during that year, that half year, was David. And we became friends. And after the class was over, we continued not only our friendship, but we started to share poems. So 1961 was a little time ago, but from that time on, as far as I can remember, without a break, we sent each other poems. We both write a lot. So he was the only one who's read almost all of he read until his passing, he read all of my poems, and I thought I read all of his until Rhina and Mike Jester and I got together to look at all of his poems. And then I kept thinking, I don't think I've seen this one before. It was a constant surprise, and I kept saying it. And there are two explanations. One is that my memory just failed. I mean, I had read thousands and thousands of his poems, but the other was, I would have remembered this. So I have no explanation as to the poems of his I didn't see. I don't think he was holding anything back. I'm sure he didn't remember most of mine either, but it was so wonderful and just unbelievable that we were able to select the poems we did for this book. And I think if you saw the book, there's some explanation that Mike and Rhina and I, we live in different places. We couldn't get together very often, and we literally had thousands of poems to go through. And we were going through them, but at some point we discovered the manuscript that David himself had put together in 2008. And I think all of us had the same thought at the same time. If this is David's selection, even though it was missing about 10 years, if this was David's selection and possibly had sent it out already, that it would really be honoring his wishes to simply do that. It was the easy way out for us. I think all of us would have liked to continue and do a selected poems from all of his work, but it just wasn't possible. And Alex was kind enough to agree to publish it. So maybe there will be other David Berman books, but this is a good introduction to his work. And everybody who knew him, as you could tell from Rhina's wonderful presentation, everybody knew him, wanted a book to be out, and here it was, and here it is. So I do recommend it. And again, we're so grateful to Alex and Able Muse that they put it out. Oh, and one more thing. If you're interested, the Wells Book Art Center published a collection of my mostly sonnets and poems in honor of David after he passed away, called First Reader. And there's much more information. If you just Google Wells Book Art Center, you'll be able to see the book and also find out a little bit more background. But anyway, I felt like I was able to write those poems shortly after he passed away, and it got put into a beautiful letterpress collection. So that was my memorial to David. But thank you.
I'd like to add one thing to what Bruce had to say, and it's this: he had published 3 chapbooks, I believe, 3 or 4, and that's all. And he had so much work that all of us kept pushing at him, get this manuscript out. He managed to find something to bite at in his own work, no matter how good it was. He always picked at something. No, this is not exactly right. And I think he was as a published poet, he was a victim of his own perfectionism, because he just was not ever pleased with anything completely.
A proof rock. That is not what I meant at all. That is not it.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. Yes, that's right. Yes.
I would love to add one more thing to that conversation before we change. I think Bruce can probably enlighten us a little bit more about the volume of the poems that they exchange. Bruce and David were just wrote at such high volume and exchange that it's so inspiring to all of us. Do you want to make a few comments about that, Bruce?
I'm not sure it's inspiring to others, but I think David probably wrote 3 poems a week from the time I knew him in 1961. And when I really got started, I wrote at least that many. So the mass of paper with comments on it, I finally had to get rid of a lot. I kept some of his very choice comments, but I finally had to get rid of practically carloads of poems of mine with his comments on them. But his comments were priceless. I always would keep the ones that said something like "too true to be good," for things like that. They were little epigrammatic comments on my work, and even when I didn't agree with them, I thought that's really funny. And I guess I did the same thing when I responded to some of his, because then he would write poems about my comments and I would write poems about his comments. So yeah, we had great fun as first readers.
It is inspiring. I just love to hear about friendships between poets and the fuel they give each other, you know, and I love to think about that paper exchange and the notes and the love of language and friendship. So thank you, Bruce. And just so everyone sees, I did put in the chat that it looks beautiful. Your collection, First Reader. I found a link to it from the Wells College site. So everyone, if you're curious, you can click on that link and find more there. Because it just looks like a beautiful production. Please, yeah, Bruce. Oh, I think you muted again. I'm gonna try to unmute you.
Okay, now.
Yeah.
Okay, Wells is a small college. Like all small colleges, it has its ups and downs. At the moment, there's no one working regularly in the Book Art Center. And I gave a reading recently for the powwows, and even I was unable to get into the Book Art Center to get copies of the book that people wanted. So I don't think you can order it at the moment, but we will hope that it'll still be available at some point. You can look at the outside maybe.
I'm going to take another scan. I think time for one more question before we wrap up. And I'll keep an eye on the chat as well. But Rhina, I would, if no one else has a question, Rhina, I would love to hear more about, you know, the relationship you have to David's work, and what you think. I mean, maybe like what poem of his would you recommend like teaching or sharing, and why, you know, to readers who have not encountered David Berman?
I think just about anything you teach of his will teach something. It will teach how to turn a thought around until it says its opposite, and they both manage to be true. He was not only a wonderful poet and a wonderful artist, but an intellect. He was an intellectual and very modest about it, but he thought in circles and with branches. And that comes through in the poetry so beautifully, without long words, without fancy academic turns of phrase, in the simplest language, like education, like conversation between highly educated people. That's what it sounds like. But he manages to always sound friendly, like a good neighbor having a cup of coffee with you. But everything he says has to be graceful and perfectly organized. He did not like breaking with the rules of the language. If you put an apostrophe where it didn't go, he would say very, very tactfully, I believe you've made an error on page 7. Line 2, paragraph so such and such, and he was our linguistic conscience. We could not get away with anything with him, although he always spoke softly. And even to this day, years after he's gone, several years after he's gone, when someone goofs, when someone puts his foot in it, we say, "Oh, David Berman is listening." Or I am speaking to you on behalf of David Berman, if there's an error to be corrected. And we have him always with us, and he is always a welcome presence.
Thank you so much for everyone. And I think we've had a lovely Q&A, and it's been wonderful to hear this conversation and more from our poets. Alex, did you want to say any final goodbyes?
I want to thank everyone for coming up this afternoon and for the wonderful readers, JC and Will, and of course, David Berman and all his friends, Rhina and Paulette and Bruce. Just to remind you all to get the books from today's readers, support the press and the readers, go to ablemusepress.com, which is the press's website, and you should have all the books there. And also you can sign up for our newsletter for future events and news, and that will be at ablemuse.com, which is the journal which goes with the press also. So I should hope to have the video for this reading in a day or so, where you can enjoy it at your leisure and find out everything you missed or words you missed during the reading. So thank you very much, Katie, for jumping in and hosting this event. And thank you, Karina, for organizing everything.
And thank you, Alex, for being Alex.
Thank you, Alex.
Yes, thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone. This was just beautiful.
You, Alex.
Thank you, guys.
You.
Take good care, everyone. Thank you.
Have a great Sunday.
Yeah, enjoy.
Good night.
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 Good night. Thank you.